Okay, these are two questions from section 6.6 in our MathLinks 8 textbook on order of operations with fractions. In the first question, we have two operations. One's an addition, one's a division. And we know from our experience with bedmass of integers, the first thing we have to do with order of operations is their division. So I'm going to write 3/4 simply as 3/4, and then I'm going to say plus whatever this works out to be as the quotient. Now, how do we divide fractions? There are three ways we can do it. We can use a common denominator method, where we divide the numerators, divide the denominators, and we get our answer that way. There is utilizing money, which we talked about before. You can do it as basically as decimals, and then rebring your number back to fractions if you want. But the easiest way that we're going to do division of fractions is to actually use multiplication. And the rule was you keep your fraction as is. Actually, I should bring this up here. Keep your first fraction, change to multiplication, and use the reciprocal of the second fraction. And the reciprocal is simply a fancy word for flipping it. And if you multiply by the second fraction's reciprocal, you will always get the same answer. So it's really easy to do this way. So we're going to call this 6/5 because when we multiply our numerators and multiply our denominators, we're going to get 6/5. So therefore, 3/5 divided in half would be 6/5, or divided into groups of a half would be 6/5. Once we get that, we're going to use our common denominator of 20. Our equivalent fraction to 3/4 is 15/20. Our equivalent fraction to 6/5 is going to be 24/20. And now that we have that, we're going to add our numerators, just like we did in grade 7, and keep our denominator. We get 39/20 as our final answer, which is fine. That's the correct answer. Or as a mixed fraction, 1 19/20. In our second example, we have 2 times 1 3/5 plus 5/8 divided by 2. Now you could probably do it mentally, the first part, but we have 3 operations here. We have a multiplication, addition, and a division. And we know from our experience before that if we have more than one operation, we have to use bedmass. So we're going to do our divisions and our multiplications first in the order they appear from left to right. So the first thing I see is a multiplication. So before I start, I'm really going to think about 2 as being 2/1, which makes sense. I'm going to multiply that by 1 3/5, but we said before that you don't really want to use mixed fractions. It's much easier to use improper. So 2 times 1 3/5 is the same thing as 2/1 times 8/5. And because I wrote it like this, it's easy to get the answer of 16/5, right? And I'm going to keep it like that. I'm not going to re-bring it down to this. So this is what we have here. Now that we have that, we're going to do our division first. Bring this over here. So actually, hold on. This should be, my apology. Oh, that's not right. This should be plus 5/8 divided by 2. Okay, so here's where we're at right now. So we've done our multiplication, we have our division left. Again, it's a whole number, so I'm just going to rewrite it real quickly as over 1. That's a good practice to always get into. So I have 16/5 plus whatever the quotient is, or the answer to the division. Our rule is keep your first fraction, change to multiplication, and the reciprocal of 2 is actually a half. And we wouldn't have seen the reciprocal of 2 unless we wrote it over 1, because we don't know what it looks like if you flipped it upside down. And once we have that, our answer is going to be 5/16. Okay? So when we solved the multiplication, we got 16/5. When we solved the division, we got 5/16. And now we're just going to add those two answers together. Our common denominator when we have 5 and 16 is a tricky one. It's actually 80 is your common denominator. So we're going to use 80 here and 80 here. Well, this gets actually very complicated. I didn't mean for it to get complicated, but it did. Does anyone know what 16 times 16 is? Well, let's look. 16 times 16 is 256. Plus 5 times 25 is 125. Did I make a mistake somewhere? Or are we okay here? Is everybody okay with 80 as your common denominator? Okay. And once we have that, we're going to then add our numerators to get 381 over 80. Now, at this particular stage, a lot of people get confused as to how many 80s there are in 381. If you think about how many 8s there are in 38, that might help you, right? 5 times 80 is 400, so we actually have 4 of them, right? So our answer is 4 And 4 times 80 is 320. So that's 320 80ths is really what that is, right? So if I have 381, that means I have 61 left over. And 61 is a prime number, which means the only thing divisible into 61 is 61 in the number 1, which means since neither, well, 1 doesn't count, but 61, 80 is not divisible by 61, then therefore 461 over 80ths. 461 80ths is your final answer.